In this second introductory video, we're going to talk about some of the finer details of cout and spacing within our IDE. So our last video ended with us writing the Hello World program that we could compile, and compilation of the code over here resulted in the console window popping up over here and telling us Hello World, exactly what was between the two quotation marks in the code over here. So let's close this console window and let's try to make some small changes to our Hello World program. So the original Hello World program that we started with printed out exactly one thing to the screen, the phrase Hello World. But the phrase Hello World is actually two different words. So perhaps most simply working within this example, perhaps I could have printed just the word hello to the screen and then had a new line of code where I printed out world to the screen. Before I hit compile, pause the video for a moment and make a prediction about what you think the console will look like when I hit compile on the code to the left. So pause, and after you make your prediction, unpause. Let's go ahead and compile our code. And I'm guessing that what's appearing in the console window on the right might not have been what was predicted by some of you, and that's okay. So let's discuss what happened here. Our program did compile. It did print the words hello and world to the screen. However, we notice perhaps two things. The first of which is that there is no space between hello and world. It appears all together. The next thing we might notice is that while hello is asked to be printed to the console on line 7, and world is asked to be printed to the console on line 8, hello and world are not separated on different lines stacked on top of one another in the console as they are in the IDE. So this is something very important that we want to take note of. And both issues have to do with how the IDE deals with spacing. So let's discuss this. The first thing to notice is that spacing outside of the quotation marks and within the IDE is not important. To emphasize this, we could hit enter on our keyboard several times, separating hello and world by several lines of vertical space in the IDE, and no amount of space that we add to the IDE will change the output that we see in the console. Running the code on the left still yields the console output on the right of hello and world jammed together with no space in between. Now this mostly manifests in terms of programming preferences, as the way that I've chosen to arrange spacing within my program is a visual preference for myself. For example, I have chosen to begin the body of the main function with a brace on line 6 and end the body of the main function with a closing brace on line 10. But lots of programmers prefer a different programming practice, which is to have the brace be on line 5 with this function declaration. And just to convince yourself that that is a perfectly valid method of programming, you can hit compile on your program and notice that again we get the same results of a console appearing on the right and printing hello world just as it did before. My programming preference is to put the brace on its own line of code, but that is a preference, not a necessity of the basic shell that we began our videos with. The same can be said of horizontal spacing. If I add tabs or spaces to line 8 and compile again, we will likewise see no difference in the console window to the spacing between hello and world. You are therefore free to use spacing within your program for preferences, as was stated before. However, we must be careful to understand where spacing is important within our programming practice and within the IDE, and where spaces is of importance is between the quotation marks. So if you're wondering why there is no space between the words hello and world in the console window, no matter what I do outside of those quotations in the IDE, it's because if I wish to see that space in the console, then I must tell the computer to print a space. And perhaps the easiest way to do that is to go to the word hello and add a space after it, so that exactly what is printed to the screen is hello, followed by a space, and then the word world. So notice that adding this space after hello allows us to compile and fix the spacing issue. While spacing outside of the quotation marks within the IDE is totally ignored, all spacing between the quotation marks while we program is taken exactly literally, meaning that if I put my cursor back between the two quotation marks by hello and add several spaces, I will then see exactly that many spaces separating the words hello and world in the console. In summary, spacing between the quotation marks will be taken literally and precisely as it is, while spacing outside of the quotation marks will be ignored. To further complicate things, spacing that we add between the quotation marks will allow us to add horizontal spacing to what's printed out to the console. One might wonder how we go about handling vertical spacing within the console. That is, if we have hello on one line and world on another, and we truly wish for hello and world to be separated by a line in the console as it appears in the IDE, how do we make that happen? A first attempt on making that happen might be to encase a return key in between a start and a stopping quotation mark. For example, coming up to the end of the word hello, hitting enter, and hoping that the enter that I've hit from within the IDE, because it is between the two quotation marks, would allow for that vertical spacing to occur. Notice, however, that there are some warning signs that this isn't going to work for us. The first warning sign are what I call these red squiggles of death, where several things in my code have been underlined with a red squiggle. Again, this is the IDE trying to warn me that I have done something incorrectly. If I had not noticed or known about the red squiggles of death and I had tried to compile this code, I immediately get a pop-up telling me that there were build errors, meaning I have syntax errors in my code. I have violated the rules of the C++ programming language, and it asks me if I'd like to run the last successful program that ran, for which I would not. And then you see a change happening at the bottom of your IDE with a list of all the different errors that the compiler found when it was looking at your code. And these lists are notoriously long for C++. But the first error that I've received is that in line 7, I am missing a closing quote. So taken just as that line is, the compiler expected to see an ending quote on line 7 because it had a beginning quote on line 7. So the fact that I've separated these ending quotes from line 7 to line 8 by hitting enter is something that is not allowed in the C++ programming language. And I'm being told that in the first error message that I receive. So that's the first thing that someone might try that doesn't actually work. This begs the question, well, what does then? And the answer is an additional word that we're going to learn in the programming language. One of the most readable ways to achieve this is by using the endline word, which is another word that is defined in the IOStream library. So the endline word is written ENDL and is pronounced endl. In order to use it, we need to first end our quotation marks about what we want printed to the screen, then insert another extraction operator, and then type our special word, ENDL, for end the line. Now if we hit compile on our program, we see the word hello on one line, we see the word world on the next line, and what appears in the console window appears exactly as it is on lines 7 and 8 in the IDE. So while horizontal spacing can be controlled through adding spacing within the quotation marks, vertical spacing needs to be controlled by the use of this endline keyword, endl. You'll also notice in this example that extraction operators can be chained, and this extends further. And in fact, you can chain together as many of these extraction operators as you'd like. So for example, if I don't want to type the word cout over and over and over again, I can delete the cout that is appearing on line 8, so long as I take the word world and put it back on line 7 and place an extraction operator between the end line and the word world. So in line 7, I have chained together 3 extraction operators, followed by 3 separate things I wish to be printed to the console. The word hello. I then would like to print a new line character to the console, like to end the line, and then I'd like to print the word world. Running this bit of code has the downside of what is written in the IDE not appearing exactly as it does on the console screen, but things appearing in the IDE as they would appear on the console is absolutely not a requirement.